from Star Citizen, we'll get to some other big news or our big topic, and that has to do with some of the challenges and issues we're seeing with working with established or mega franchises or IPs. As Rob just mentioned, it was announced that yet another game in the Star Wars universe has been canceled. And this was the one. I'm trying to find that news piece. Did you find that on Gamasutra?
I did not. Oh wait, maybe I did. Hold on a second.
Let's see.
No, I did not. Oh, there was the PUBG one that made me sick. But no, I don't have it on Gamasutra. But yeah, they canceled the latest Star Wars, which gives us only two Star Wars games ever since Disney and EA decided to partner up with an exclusivity deal. Compared to the vast number of Star Wars games that had come out beforehand. And as I was mentioning to Josh, the Zen Pinball has 19 Star Wars pinball tables available that cover the entire range of Star Wars movies and the animation series. So someone's doing right by that IP. I know that fans are ravenous for as much as they can get, and it seems like a complete loss on EA's part and Disney's part to pump out more material.
Yeah, and I did find it was reported on Gamasutra, so it was an open world Star Wars game. It was a development by EA Vancouver, and this is from Visceral. Like, if you remember that little expose they did a few months ago, that they were originally planning on doing their own Star Wars game following Dead Space, and EA just decided to, pull the plug on that. And it's definitely a very interesting case, and this is why we kind of picked this for our first main topic, about how it seems like we're seeing a lot more in terms of difficulty with working with these established franchises. And again, like, this is a huge cry from back in the day. Again, for us old guys on stream, we remember, the licensing games of the NES and SNES era. I'm sure everybody loved those LJN games that were released, right?
Oh my god. Are you talking about like the Super Star Wars and stuff?
Or even going further back, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Rocketeer, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was turned into a video game.
Oh, you can go back further. E.T. or Empire Strikes Back on the Atari,
Yeah. And like licensing games or licensed titles like that, they framed Han Solo, yeah. Like, they've always had a lot of money thrown into them, because again, it's never cheap to work with an established franchise, but you're supposed to make that money back in terms of, again, just getting that recognition out there. I know when I spoke with John Brieger about this, we talked about how there is huge money for everyone involved if one of those games works. But as we all remember, a lot of licensed games from, I don't know, like, when did it really start to get better? Like, would we say like mid-thousands, maybe even like this past decade?
For licensed games to be good? I'd say that there were always good licensed games, but like not a lot of them. It's just who gets to make the title and how willing are they to make it good. And it shouldn't. You think it shouldn't be that hard, but it always winds up being difficult for some reason. I think it's because you do have a lot of people, like too many cooks in the kitchen. The IP holder wants to control a lot of stuff. The designer wants to control a lot of stuff. Then you have other interested parties who want to control the stuff just because they're fans of it. And certainly we had the Walking Dead issues with Telltale recently, where they had to shut all that stuff down. It seems to be a rampant thing that most of the time it's going to be bad. I know that they used like the Pitch Black movies. I can't remember the guy's name, the character's name. Vin Diesel played. That was a good IP cover for the Xbox, and I mean, I'm sure we could all cherry pick games from the past that were well made, even like in the arcades.
Oh yeah. Simpsons,
and that kind of thing. Simpsons were great. Yeah.
Dragon,
So
I think
the
you just described like every
Riddick,
one
yeah,
of the
thank you,
Arkham
Misha.
games, Batman Arkham games, right?
Yeah,
Because when you uppercut someone off a rooftop, they're not walking that off.
right. Well, they certainly don't in the game because you know you kill them and they got to stay down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, Rob, like we've seen really good examples of licensed games, even going as far back as like the NES era. But like the GI Joe games again, TMNT, Simpsons, stuff like that. But as you said, it really depends on who gets that license. And
Yeah,
for most of the license holders, they're not really looking at game developers. We got really lucky that I guess Capcom and Disney got all buddy buddy, and we got Darkwing Duck, Tailspin, Mickey Mouse, so on and so forth.
mm-hmm. DuckTales.
Mm-hmm. There we go. I need to read that comic too. I heard people talking about that. Hello, Daniel. And as we were saying, like it is a license to print money, but there's so many additional stipulations that go into that. Rob mentioned a few minutes ago dealing with the license holder. And I know when I spoke with John about this, he said the same thing. Like if you're licensing I don't know, I know the Noid from Domino's, like we saw a few of those games.
Right.
That they're not. Domino's doesn't want a game where the Noid is just running around slicing people's throats in. Well, that'll
Right.
be a very confusing Domino's ad. Or the 7-Up spot,
Yeah.
stealing and dealing with drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and Star Wars, obviously, as well. We saw. Correct me if I'm wrong, either you, Rob, or anyone watching. There was just one Star Wars games on the NES, or did they do the whole trilogy on the NES?
I remember the SNES had the trilogy.
Yeah.
I don't remember the Nintendo, and I know Atari had Empire Strikes Back, which I enjoyed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, my favorite Star Wars game of my childhood was the arcade Star Wars, the vector-based one, and I thought that was fantastic. And I wish they made more things like that. But yeah, as far as NES goes, I really don't have a strong memory of Star Wars games.
Mm-hmm. I. Oh, good. Now we're gonna get Wendy's on this. Maybe
yeah.
get Wendy's a sponsor game Wisdom. There we go.
There you go. I could go down for a Big Bacon Classic or whatever it is they make.
As a quick tangent, I remember when I worked at Comcast, there were people who ate Wendy's every day of the week. And like I was just sitting there going, how can you eat that every day without just like, dying basically? Oh, there we go. Exactly.
Funny. Reminds me of the old Burger King games for the Xbox. Those were actually reasonably good games.
Mm-hmm.
So shockingly.
Now I lost my. Oh yeah, and another Star Wars game I like. Remember that Star Wars arcade game? It was like a massive booth you sat in.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. The vector-based one.
Was that in the mid-90s?
Oh no, that was 80s. I'm pretty sure it could have. I mean, it could have been late as the 90s, but I know.
Because I remember they did like a full 3D one. They even had like a Darth Vader attacking like game.
They did have that one with the lightsaber and stuff.
I never did watch all of Dune, which I think I just cost myself gamer points for admitting that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. I've watched Dune, I haven't read it, which sucks. The Star Wars original arcade vector game was 1983.
Okay. And the Indiana Jones games, there was a very crappy one on the NES. And then they did the Super Nintendo one was really good. It's also very hard. That was one of the games I was testing out for platforming.
Yeah, it's like the Super Star Wars games. I don't know if they're good. I don't think they're good, but they are incredibly difficult. They look pretty good. They have good music, but they are super difficult and not that well made. You might like as platformers go. I think you could find better, especially on the SNES.
And like again, like talking about like the differences between like licensed games from like 80s, 90s to today. Like during the 90s, again, like anything that became even remotely popular, there was a chance. I gotta respond to that one in a second. There was a chance it was going to become a video game. I remember when I did some research for my book, like LGN scored because of like their original tie-in or their original company. They scored a lot of licensing deals for movies. Like they were kind of like the one who went to Hollywood for like any movie that came out. They would get turned into a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And like we saw Darkman, for instance. Anyone remember Darkman from the 90s?
Yeah, that was Liam Neeson, wasn't it?
Yeah. And as Dragon says, yeah, that'll be some real meta right there. The live action Sonic getting a movie tie-in based off of a video game character getting turned into a live action movie.
And then it becomes a musical, and then it becomes a musical game. So it's got to come full circle.
And don't forget, Detective Pikachu is probably going to have his own game as well.
There you go.
Oh yeah, I heard that too, Dragon. There's a Sonic game that you create your own Sonic characters. Oh, I'm sure DeviantArt had a field day with that one. Oh yeah, Empire Strikes Back was a pain. Oh, and here's another little bit of weird licensing. I was like looking through the SNES collection. They made a beat 'em up based off of, what was it? The Shadow, that superhero movie starring Alec Baldwin.
That was Who Knows the Shadow Knows. Yeah, I remember the movie coming out, and I think I saw it, but I don't remember much past that.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, there's also the Phantom that starred Billy Zane. And the video, and to make things even more confusing, the cartoon was based off of Phantom 2040, so it had no relation to the movie. And then they made a video game based on the cartoon.
This interwoven multimedia IP sharing thing we have going on, it's insane. And I think bringing it back into the EA deal, it's like when you make these contracts, long-term exclusivity deals, you're kind of hindering the output you're going to get. EA, I don't know if EA cares. I'll be honest. Like, they've got money, they're making a ton of games. I don't know if they care that much that they're not making a ton of Star Wars games. It's probably a pain for them.
When you said that, Rob, like EA cares, I just sort of thought like those old commercials. You hear like the nice, sappy, smooth jazz. EA cares. No, they don't.
No, they don't. But like, I'm sure there's a ton of pressure to make a good Star Wars game. Certainly, we've had our share of bad ones and bad any IP, and the games they've made have been well received. But like, I know, like, it's not that difficult to make decent games using very popular IP. Yeah. It's the challenge just isn't there. There's too many good games that you can, and calling attention to the lawsuit that just happened, that you can almost blatantly just copy and just reskin. The fact is that game design and flow and all that stuff, as far as platformers, as far as RPGs, you can more or less duplicate someone else's game and just put new characters in there, and you can make something wholly on your own and still kind of borrow without just slopping together a terrible game. Yeah.
And again, we've seen that. Everyone knows, obviously at this point, Super Mario Bros. 2 release over here was just a reskin of the game Doki Doki Panic. Nintendo basically just took everything and reskinned it as Mario because of obviously Mario having more brand recognition, and bing bang boom, you have a new game.
Yeah, and the most confusing sequel ever.
Exactly. But it turned out it was all a dream, so it's all okay. I just spoiled the game from like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, we've seen this before, and there are games that have been released. I know when I spoke with John about this, that you develop the game, you develop the core gameplay loop, and then you kind of pitch that and explain them how the licensing will fit. So in many cases, these games could have been designed, like Darkwing Duck could have been, pick any other character. Like, they could have just created an original character, but once they got that license, they just reskinned it. Because, again, the licensing has that brand factor. And
that goes to Simpsons and TMNT. Those were not very different games at all. I mean, they were basically the same.
Yeah.
Just different coats of paint.
Except when we got to the NES era, and they were just some, oh my god, nightmarish Simpsons games that were released. And don't forget Rocky and Bullwinkle that I'm still trying to wipe from my memory.
Oh, a good one, The Three Stooges. That was a good game.
Oh God,
that was a very.
I still don't know how you're supposed to beat that game legitimately.
It was tough. All the little mini games. I did get decent at it though. Memory serves.
Yeah. And yeah, as Daniel pointed out there, like the last Star Wars game, not the one that was just canceled, the one that was being done by Visceral, it sounded really great. And that's the other side of this. And again, we could probably spend a good hour and a half on this, which the people watching won't mind, but we'll eventually run out of our voice here. But it was reported that one of the issues they ran into was getting approval by Lucas and, of course, by extension Disney to do that kind of game. Because again, like the Star Wars license has had a lot of real like ups and downs in terms of its lore and its brand. Again, at this point, what are we up to? We have the movies, we have the cartoons, we have books, comics, different animated series, prequels, the video games. There was a Star Wars magazine I remember back in the day. There was a CCG based on Star Wars. And here's a question, I'm sure the PC fans will probably know this, but anybody here remember the Star Wars real-time strategy games that was released by Petroglyph a few years ago?
I do not remember that.
Exactly. There's just so many games. And when it comes to these mega brands, the license holders really can, put a clamp down on what you can and can't do. Again, when you're talking about a platformer, really, there's not much you can really say. Like, we don't want a Yogi Bear to Mario stomp on an enemy. Okay, well, let them throw pies or throw picnic baskets. But when we get to 3D, and especially when we get to more cinematic style games, it becomes a far different story. Like, excuse me, Batman and Superman have definitely had a very sordid history when it comes to good license games. Like, we all remember, we obviously know Batman the Arkham franchise, which I love the first and second one. I didn't really like 3 and 4. But there were other Batman games as well. There was a really good one, and I cannot remember the name of it, that came, I think, during the N64 PS2 era. And then even before that, I played Batman Returns. I think that's the right one.
I was just thinking of that one, the platformer?
No, I think that was a beat-em-up. Oh, wait.
Oh, okay.
There's
I'm remembering a 2D platformer.
Yeah, there was original Batman by Sunsoft, Batman Returns, Batman Revenge of the Joker, Batman Forever. Then we got the Batman, the first of the Dark Knight game movies got one. Then there are again a ton of other ones I can't remember. And like the Batman beat 'em up game was actually really great, and that was handled by Konami. Batman had his he had an explosive vial he would throw down and kill people with, but again, Batman doesn't kill; they were just sleeping at the end.
Yeah, I think that that was a weird era where the games were better than the movies, even, and that was a low bar.
Because we all loved Batman. What was it? Batman Forever, right? With Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze.
Yeah.
Which that got turned into a video game. One part beat 'em up, one part detective adventure game. Oh, and you had to drive the Batmobile. That was really fun.
Yeah.
But as you were saying, sometimes if you just let the developer or the studio do their own thing, you do get some very interesting products. And we've seen cases where I don't think the license holder really expected much and blew everybody away. And probably the biggest example right now would be The Witcher. The Witcher has turned into a mega cash cow for CD Projekt Red. And again, this was a Polish fantasy anthology series that nobody ever heard of. Up until we could arguably say the second game was when it blew up. And again, even the author didn't expect that to do all that well. And lo and behold, in the course of a few years, CD Projekt Red became one of the preeminent developers. The Witcher has turned into one of the most celebrated CRPG franchises. We're getting a Netflix series. And all this came because the author probably thought, these guys aren't going to do a good job with this game. It's going to be some crappy little game. And what happened?
Yeah, it's a tough one because I know. I mean, having worked on IP, like working with people trying to use the IP for educational games, I know that the biggest thing, and I feel this stems from the actual people making the movies, is writing all the rules, and especially in an animated thing, you have to keep the drawings consistent. So you have to write all these very specific rules. Like if the character is angled this way, you have to draw their eyebrow like this, and if they are angled the other way, well, it's just got to be mirrored, even if that's not, how it would look in real life. And so you get a game, like someone trying to make a game, and they have to use those exact same rules. Well, game developers aren't quite used to that same strict rule set. And, you go into it thinking in your mind, well, I have this brilliant game in my head that can really embrace this series that I love so much. And then you hit this wall of rules that you have to abide by. And the sad part is, instead of embracing the rules and applying that to your game and being creative about it, people just get upset, like, oh, you're disrespecting my design. It seems to be the kind of feeling that comes through, instead of, okay, well, we can work together and make something truly great. But then again, you do run into an issue where you will butt heads with the IP holder over things that don't matter, and that becomes problematic.
Yep. And like one of the risks, of course, is the fact that as a developer, there's a difference between if the license holder wants a game versus you approaching the license holder. Like if you're trying to approach someone, you need to make sure this game is exactly up to their standards. But what happens if they say no? Can you release this game, as some other character, some other crazy thing? And for a lot of these games, like, again, the license is the thing that brings people in. Like, are you going to play, a game starring Nutty the Squirrel, or are you going to play something that stars Mario or Zelda? And we have to talk about Smash in a few minutes, but we'll say that as like kind of the final part of this topic.
Yeah, and that is the main question. You use the IP because you need it's an easier way to advertise. You can just say, well, I have a Batman game, and suddenly you've got a lot of interest. Or I have some generic platformer or beat 'em up, and you have zero interest unless you spend a lot of money in marketing. It just makes things easier. It's an easy way to gain leverage in sales, and then you run into those other problems, those creative differences that can completely derail a product depending on the egos involved. So certainly it can produce bad games, it can produce great games depending on the partnerships. But yeah, the necessity for an IP can be everything, especially for a studio that wants to save a little bit of money on marketing and put more money into the development.
And I don't know, Dragon, maybe we'll all turn out that Death Stranding is really just Star Citizen. That'll be the great twist right there. Yeah. And I know about that, Melinius. Yeah, and again, like, for a lot of the license holders, you don't know, like, when someone approaches you, like, what their repertoire is. You don't know if they're going to make a good or a bad game. You just know there's money involved with it. And, we were talking about this, I think, earlier in the cast about Pinball FX and Zen Studios with those licensing for the tables. For those of you who remember, I've spoken with the Pinball Arcade, Farsight Studios, several times, and it is a lot of work when you start doing licensing on a pinball table, or just licensing in general. You need to get in touch with everybody. Is there copyrightable music? Well, you got to talk to the composer of that. What about
voice actors? Yeah.
Exactly, voice actors as well. Like, if you're going to do something, you better make sure, like, do you get the original voice actors? Will they agree to it? You're going to have to deal with
the interesting thing about that is a lot of times you have a specific budget, and you don't necessarily want Harrison Ford to do the voice, or having to deal with Toy Story. You don't necessarily want Tom Hanks to do the voice, and those actors always have the first rights of refusal. Yep. So if you do want those actors, you're not guaranteed, and if you don't want to spend the money, well, you might be screwed because they say yes. and they have a specific amount. Interesting side note: most of the voices that Tom Hanks denies go straight to his brother, which he sounds enough like him where you don't notice most of the time. So that's an interesting thing that I had to learn back then. Is the pricing between the original and the next person in line is significant, and can take your game in completely different directions based on your budgetary constraints.
Or as the Simpsons say, you just get the non-union Mexican equivalent of a character.
Yeah, exactly. But again, if that actor finds out that you use someone else and they didn't get a chance to refuse or accept, that winds up costing a little bit more than all of those all of the original possibilities.
Oh yeah. And again, like, all this gets factored into that budget. And as you just said, Rob, like, it may earn you a lot of money, but if those games fail and you have to pay all, because again, the voice actors, they don't care, or the movie stars, they don't care if your game didn't score a 95 on Metacritic. They want, whatever they were promised in their contract.
Yeah, and they usually promise money up front, like for games, because I think that the revenue stream, the rev share is probably so complicated at a certain point. And you mentioned pinball, like in terms of gauging quality, I think even amongst hardcore gamers, gauging the quality of a pinball table is almost impossible, because unless you're intimately familiar with pinball, which fans of pinball are, you have no clue what makes a good pinball table. You have none. So a pinball person can come to you and explain the game, and you're just like, well, it's pinball, so sure. And then it winds up being the worst pinball game in the world, and infamous in that regard. And you had no idea that your brand is now tainted. So like in movie studios have the same problem. They don't know a thing about games. Like, movies are too hard to make to actually learn about games at the same time. And we've seen completely infamous examples of a movie studio or a director or producer deciding he wants to take a swing at games, and it rarely ends well.
Yep. And again, like, it's very hard. Like, what happens when it does become popular as well? That's another big issue. Like we saw with The Witcher, and with Batman. Like, when something big happens like that, then it's going to become a lot harder to kind of renegotiate, because the license holder now has a lot more clout with you. Like, if you didn't sign on for like most companies, I know I talked with John about this, they're not going to be stupid enough to say, oh, we're going to give you this license for 15 years, do whatever you want with it. It's usually on a per game basis, or maybe by a limited time. As people know from the whole Marvel versus Sony issue, when Marvel sold the rights to a lot of their characters back in the mid-90s, during that time when Marvel was dying and we would never see another Marvel character again, that strange period we all forgot about.
Yeah.
That there was a stipulation saying that Sony, or by extension Fox, had to keep producing movies like X amount for like over a period of years, or the license would reverse or bounce back to Marvel. And the reason they did that was just so they couldn't just hoard that license for it. They had to make use of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I worry that's what's happening with EA. And there is a bit of a good faith thing going on, too, between both the IP holder and the game creator, because you never know when the IP holder promises you something that they actually don't have the rights to, or that you as the game developer promise that you're going to make a game and then you just copy a Fallout game, and for example, that would never happen, of course. So it's like, there's all this lack of knowledge and all this visibility issue that both sides will have, the developer and the IP holder, and they just got to trust. And when things like that happen on both the movie side, like they promise they can get this actor and that actor side says no because they actually don't own that actor, things fall through, people get upset, and then lawsuits happen, and it kind of hurts the rest of the industry.
Yep. And going back to the whole X-Men issue with Silicon Knights, again, that could have been an amazing X-Men game. And this is what pisses off the license holders, because again, as you just said, Rob, it's not just a company that's behind the barrel. It's that company, it's the license holder, it's any voice actors, any actors who are part of that. If you're going to get I don't know, The Lion King, Like, you're going to put your best. Like, if you were getting the Lion King license back in 1994, 1995 when it was made, you're not putting your C team on that game. Like, you do not want to piss off Disney. Which, again, I think that motto lasts to this day as well.
Unless you're THQ.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting point from Malwini is the Dungeons and Dragons thing. It's funny because I can't think of another property that licensed their design over their name, because there are all kinds of games that came out that were based on the Dungeons and Dragons engine, but they are their own IP, and that was always interesting to me.
Yeah. And speaking about Dungeons and Dragons, like Lord of the Rings has been another very interesting one, because we've seen. And that actually takes me to another part of this topic. What happens when you kind of let everybody do their own thing with a license? And Lord of the Rings has been one. Again, most people know Lord of the Rings for the Peter Jackson movies. But I remember there was a Lord of the Rings RPG for the Super Nintendo. There's, of course, that 1980s. I think, was that done by Don Bluth, the Lord of the Rings? Or is that done by some other famous one?
I do. It might be Bluth. Let's see.
Well, Rob is looking that up. And then when the movies came out, again, we're back to EA.
Oh, Bakshi, Ralph Bakshi.
Okay, got it. When EA got the license, we saw all manner of Lord of the Rings style games. There was the beat 'em up or action games based off the movies. There was an RPG that was based off, that was loosely tied to the movies. There were the RTS games. There was,
one of the very first major co-op board games came out based on Lord of the Rings. Like one of the very first ones. Yeah, it was very groundbreaking and very difficult.
There's also the pinball game based off the Lord of the Rings movies as well.
Yeah, that was well received too.
Let's see.
Lego, very good point.
Oh yes, all the Lego games. Lord of the Rings Online, obviously, and so it's just in my head. Oh yeah, the Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor, and Shadow of War as well. And in these cases, EA was kind of once they kind of proved themselves, they were almost given more or less carte blanche to do what they want in that universe. Because Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor are they have nothing to do with those movies other than saying we're in Mordor.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because inside a company like EA, you never know what's going to happen, because the team that worked on, that first game that did so well, maybe they made a deal to make their own IP after that, and so the next game that has to be made by a whole different team, and you never know what's going to happen there.
Yep. And even then, the whole issue with the loot boxes as well, with Shadow of... I keep confusing. Shadow of War was the second one, right?
I think so. Yeah. Shrug.
Yeah, they had the whole loot boxes. I know some people complain that they made a Shelob in the Shadow of War to be a sexy spider lady instead of just being a giant spider there. And that's another point. When you start taking liberties with the license, it can also come back to bite you, because again, you have to make sure that gets approved. You're not going to see Mickey Mouse pull out an assault rifle and start shooting people. Right.
Now, I mean, there is one of those infamous book to movie things that happened when Stanley Kubrick did The Shining. Stephen King kind of infamously hated that movie, and yet you had one of the greatest directors of all time working on this game that was this movie that was super well received. And that same thing does happen in games. You have these people who are brilliant teams, and they're going to take care of your IP, but it's not going to be what the IP holder necessarily wants, but it's what the gamers want. And that is, we kind of touched on that earlier, but that's a huge point of contention.
Yeah.
Mickey Mouse God of War, love it.
El Gordo, if you haven't heard, there is a Mickey Mouse in a JRPG franchise that I don't think anyone here has ever heard of, that should be coming out in a few days. Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
Nobody ever heard of that.
No, I was actually telling my wife about that. She had never heard about that. She's like, why would they do that? And I'm like, it's super popular and people love it.
Try to explain to her the story. See if she'll follow.
So you're going through every single land and meeting every character from every Disney movie. and they join your party sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
hate Kingdom Hearts for shame.
And Cloud from Final Fantasy shows up and
Cloud from Final Fantasy is there. Yep.
There we go. But yeah, like there's still so much more we can talk about. But I have a few more points on. We'll see where we go from there. Like
sounds good.
With these licensing, again, there is huge money involved, but it also causes a lot more nightmares when things fail. And one of the big examples of this would be the Toys to Life genre, which for a period of time was massive. You know, everybody, amiibos were, more valuable than gold for a period of time. Parents were killing each other over Skylanders figurines. And of course, Disney Infinity. And like that's a strange thing. Disney Infinity was the first one to go. And you would think that would be just literally printing money at that point. You know, a game where I can have Luke Skywalker team up with Black Panther, who then goes to battle Mickey Mouse and Doctor Doom. I mean, it just sounds like it would have been a no-brainer. But that would have been... I can't even imagine the limitations they were put under for how Disney Infinity was going to work with all those characters.
Yeah, and you got this internal kind of, I wouldn't say conflict, but there's two very different departments working together. And this happened when I was there, is that you have the Disney marketing team and the Disney game studio team, Disney Interactive. Yeah. And Disney Interactive was completely, very volatile. Like it was all over the place. It would be good one year and bad the next, and it would have different ownership and different CEOs all the time. And whereas the marketing team is the marketing team, and Disney's strength. So you get those two teams working together, and one of them is inconsistent. You're probably going to start having some really high variant in success and quality.
There you go, Goro. That's the game that I want to see. And Scrooge McDuck is the man in the chair directing Donald the whole time
on a pogo stick.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, and like as you said, Rob, like from the outside, it looked like Disney Infinity was, this perfect franchise. Who could ever see that game failing? But internally, it's a far different story, and that's a topic in of itself. About how internal conflicts within studios. But another point, and then we'll get to the Smash, and then we'll move on. Hopefully, at some point. I don't know about that, J Fudge. I don't know. People want me to play Kingdom Hearts. That would have to be something a lot of people want me to see. I may have just screwed myself there, Rob. I don't know.
Yeah.
But one thing that's also very challenging is when licensing changes hands. And that's one of the things that's a nightmare in of itself. Like, for instance, I was a huge fan of a lot of the Marvel animated series that came out during the mid-thousands. This was before the Avengers, this was before all that other craziness. What was that? Avengers, Earth Mightiest Heroes. I really liked Spectacular Spider-Man. They were really great shows. And again, this was a case of basically Marvel saying, here's a license, we're not doing anything with it, do whatever the hell you want with it. And they gave it to the right people, and it worked. Just like with Batman the Animated Series. I mean, who could have thought that was going to turn out to be like a groundbreaking show? Way back in early 90s. But what happened, though, was even though those shows are doing good, they were canceled almost, immediately when Marvel said, hey, the cinematic universe is picking up. Let's make our own brand of that and trying to tie it in like that. And I don't think I've liked a Marvel animated series since. I guess, have you watched any of them, Rob?
Oh no! I haven't even seen the Batman ones, and I know that's to my own detriment, right? But I gotta say, I feel like there's too many other games and movies that are taking my attention these days.
Yeah, and that's like the weirdest thing, because DC has had some really great anime movies. They've certainly been better than their regular ones. I've heard mixed things about that Titans show that's been out too. And it seems like the comics are doing like a little bit better. But again, I am not a comic book guy, so don't be quoting me about, Josh says DC beats Marvel in terms of comics. But like that's always been that point. about, or that challenge of what happens when things change. Because as you said, and as we've talked about, the license holder ultimately has complete control. Like if you're going to license off, Batman to make your game, then DC at any time can say, you know what, we don't want to do this game anymore. You're screwed. Like you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
Like Batman, the Brave and the Bold, I liked. I actually like Batman. What was it? Beware the Batman? It was kind of like a year one version. Yeah, like DC has had some really strong animated series. I think again it's because they just give it to people who have credit. Like they give it to people who know what they're doing instead of trying to square a peg into a round hole. But with that said, the final point for this topic, and then we'll see where we move on, is probably like the craziest example of licensing madness, and that is Smash Brothers. Smash is one of those games that nobody thought was going to do all that well, and it has become just like a marquee franchise for Nintendo, and it's probably just become a legal nightmare for lawyers involved. Because we have to agree to have Street Fighter, Bayonetta, Fire Emblem, Mario, Metal Gear, Sonic. Who else? Again, just pick everybody. Everybody's in Smash.
And the interesting thing, about that is that there's been movies in the last 30 years that have kind of done that. Roger Rabbit being one of the first, to take all these different IP, and certainly got Lego. As another big one. The big nightmare recently was oh god, why can't I remember the name of the stupid book? The one you had to do a report on, but you didn't like so much, the Spielberg one.
Ready Player One.
Ready Player One. Then there's the Pixar arcade game one, Ralph, Wreck-It Ralph. Those are definitely a nightmare. Like even combining them again, when I worked on it, like there were so many rules about Disney princesses could not be in the same universe together. And of course now it's like they hang out together in their various TV shows. So they do. It is a very strange, bizarre world of IP clashing. It's like two galaxies colliding. It's just a giant mess.
You couldn't have Cinderella throw like a glass slipper at another princess.
Oh yeah, you can't do that. But now you probably could, and I feel like that for the fans, and a lot of these companies are starting to realize that fans love this. They love seeing all their different IP on there. They love the idea of pitting one of their favorite characters against one of their least favorite. Like that's fun. It's fun for me anyway.
And talking about those movies, and Chad was bringing up Constantine, that's one of the very weird things about, again, this nightmarish ball of licensed properties, is that a lot of the times the properties that do get sold and licensed are your C and D squads. Again, would DC hand over Superman to an untested company? Or would they hand over, Constantine, or that Legends of Tomorrow show on CW? Again, they're going to give the characters that nobody really expects. There's not really that push for. And then what happens is that then those characters become big, and all of a sudden that C-lister now becomes an A-list. Exactly, like with Batman: The Hands of Roxanne. Again, like nobody was really doing anything with Batman back at that point. And there's even been talks. I remember like reading like seeing like historical documents saying that Batman was going to die at some point, like as like a franchise. Like nobody could do a good story around him. And then things picked up with Alan Moore. What was that? Dark Knight Returns, and that kind of set things going. And as anyone knows, like the famous story, that when Marvel was looking to do the cinematic universe, nobody knew who Iron Man was, nobody knew who Thor was, Black Widow.
People knew who Thor was.
What?
Thor, everyone knew who Thor was, just not as a comic book.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, he was in the Incredible Hulk TV show.
Well, he was also in, the Norse mythology.
Yeah. But in terms
that
of
little thing.
the comic book there, like,
right.
And so what happened, of course, was they took these characters that they had the license for because nobody wanted them, and now look at what happened today. Uh,
Mm.
you know, you can't. Iron Man is now probably one of the most recognizable characters. Anybody who's in the Avengers movie, and then again, it becomes this perpetual motion machine. They've already talked about spinning off those characters into their own TV shows or movies. The whole
Yeah.
Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was one example. There's going to be a Loki TV show. There's going to be a Black Widow, probably. What was it? Scarlet Witch. The fact that I even know who those characters are at this point is a really good example of this as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. It is a very interesting world for that. And per Draken's point, yeah, they've removed a lot of those restrictions of what a character can do, just just because they realize fans love it and it makes money. I think that is the key. But yeah, I feel like the dream of a small studio is to get the IP that is kind of untapped. Getting a Batman IP as a small studio is great but at the same time, there's a lot of pressure, and you have to deliver a really high quality product because it's going to be on everyone's radar. But if you can grab a product that the IP holder doesn't care about and has just enough visibility, that can be a gold mine. And that's what indie developers, or I shouldn't even say indie, but small companies that are just trying to get a leg in the door or a foot in the door. That's what you should strive for, is to get an IP that no one really knows about, but is kind of known at the same time.
Yeah.
That hasn't been used in a long time.
Who here remembers Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, which at this point we could basically say is like the prequel to Into the Spider-Verse. And that's another good point. That Into the Spider-Verse movie, who outside of comic book fans, thank you, we got some people on there, who outside of like the hardcore Spider-Man fans knew who Spider-Man Noir was, or Spider-Pig, or Spider-Gwen? But now they're already talking about having spin-off movies, because again, as you just said, Rob, it's that dream. Like, you take a property that it was known, but it's not exactly bringing in like billions of dollars, and you do that, you become the studio or the company that does that, you're going to be pretty much set as long as you can maintain that level of quality. Rocksteady, I just don't know about Rocksteady. That's going to be a tough one. And yeah, like Shattered Dimension, like when that was, I completely forget the developer who did that. Like, and that was still during that time when Spider-Man was still relatively, he was known but not like super duper big in terms of game releases. And it hit a lot of really great notes. And again, introduced us to characters that we never would have thought of to have in a Spider-Man game. Spider-Man 2049 or 2089 or something like that. I keep confusing that with the Anno series and like their number designation.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it becomes that never-ending cycle of, we take an unknown character, make a great game or a movie, then that character becomes an A-lister who then gets a C or D list in their movie, who then becomes an A-list in another movie. And it reminds me of that chart in South Park when they were doing the fractured butthole, and they had like this entire plan of like every character. This guy gets a Netflix series who will then lead into this character's spin-off, who leads into this character's graphic novel, who will then be featured in this movie, who will then introduce a new character and stuff like that.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Ghost Rider. Yeah, again, that's another point. Like, and it also, and I think this will be my last point, because again, we'll be here for 2 hours on this topic if we're not careful, that there's always that risk, again, when you start translating characters in terms of getting that property right. Again, there are a lot of comic book fans I know who've been arguing over, how characters are represented, how they show up in movies or TV shows. It's not, I don't think there's so much of that in video games, just because I think the license holder has so much hold over them.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I can't really speak to how comic book characters come off, because I am like a lot of folks here. I'm not really a comic book guy. I dabbled for a little bit when I read like The Watchmen in college, but even then it wasn't new. But yeah, I don't know much about these characters, and film, TV, and video games are what bring it to life for me.
Yeah.
So that's basically all I know from them. And like it was mentioned earlier, Stan Lee, basically all I know of him is what is from his
Yeah.
cameos and doing research after that fact. Um, but yeah, sorry, I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah. And I'll throw one more little quiz to the chat and people watching. Who here remembers the Green Lantern animated series that came out and only got like one season? Because I really like that one. And again, like sometimes when you're dealing with license holders, you just never know what's going to stay around. Because like we said, even if you have a successful video game or TV show or whatever, they can pull out at any minute and say, you know, we're just going to do something else, or we don't see the money in it, and all that stuff is gone.
Yeah, I kind of want to get a company together and go after like the Sam and Max or Maniac Mansion properties and see if maybe Monkey Island and revive those because I know Disney's not going to do anything with those.
Yeah, it was J Fudge. Let me see. Anything else before we move on? We talked about Smash. We talked about the licensing. Yeah, like for me with comic books, I just don't have the money to spread around between video games, computer parts, and all my other stuff to then be buying comic books as well. I do really want to read that Dark Knight's Metal though. Like to me, the perfect would be if I just get like one massive compilation. Like I don't want to have to hunt down 15 to 20 issues or whatever.
Yeah.
No, it was not about Machinima deleting their channel. Maybe we'll talk about that as our second topic then, about like video game videos and stuff. But I think I'm about out thoughts for this topic. Do you have anything to end on, Rob?
I do not.
All right. Well, for the record folks, we're going to end the video here. But for the live people, let's do our quick weird games, and then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of like